November 1957. Studio 6B, NBC Television, New York City. The red on-air light glowed above the soundstage. 20 million Americans were watching the Nat King Cole show, and they were about to witness something that had never happened on national television before. Nat King Cole, in an elegant tuxedo, stood beside his guest, singer Julie London, in a shimmering evening gown. The orchestra began a gentle waltz, and then, as the cameras rolled and the nation watched, Nat extended his hand. Julie took it. They began to dance. A black man and a white woman. Touching, on national television in 1957, America. For 3 minutes, it was just music and movement. Elegant, graceful, professional. Two performers executing a simple dance number that would have been unremarkable if it had involved any other combination of people. But it wasn't unremarkable. It was revolutionary and terrifying and about to change everything. Because within seconds of the show ending, the phone calls began. Before we dive into the story of how one dance became a battleground for America's soul, and how Nat King Cole risked everything rather than back down, tell me, when was the last time you did something that felt dangerous because it was simply right? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this story about courage, principle, and the price of breaking taboos is as relevant now as it was 70 years ago. The Nat King Cole show had launched in November 1956 with hope and impossible odds. Nat was already a massive star. His records sold millions. His voice was one of the most recognized in America. But television was different. Television came into people's homes, into their living rooms, into spaces where they could control what their children saw, what their families were exposed to. And in 1957 America, a significant portion of the country believed that a black man didn't belong in that space. Not as a host, not as a star, not as an equal. NBC knew the risk. The southern states were a massive market. Sponsors were nervous, but Nat's talent was undeniable, and the network made a calculation. Maybe America was ready. Maybe the music would transcend the racism. Maybe. The show was beautiful. 15 minutes later expanded to 30. Nat, performing his hits, interviewing guests, showcasing his charm and sophistication. The production values were high. The music was impeccable. By any objective standard, it was quality television. But sponsors wouldn't buy commercial time. Not the major ones. Not the brands that had money and reach. They cited regional concerns. They mentioned demographic targeting. They used every euphemism in the corporate vocabulary to avoid saying what everyone knew. They were afraid of Southern boycotts, afraid of controversy, afraid of associating their products with a black man on television. Nat performed anyway, week after week, creating something beautiful despite the business reality that the show was dying slowly from corporate cowardice. He knew the numbers, knew that without sponsors, the show couldn't survive. But he also knew something else. Visibility mattered. Representation mattered. A generation of black children seeing someone who looked like them hosting a major network show mattered. So he kept performing. And he kept pushing boundaries. The idea to have Julie London as a guest came from Nat himself. She was a friend, a respected vocalist, someone he'd known for years in the music industry. The plan was simple. She'd sing a number, they'd do a duet, and at the end, they'd dance. The network executives reviewed the proposal and saw the problem immediately. "You can't dance with her," they said. "Why not?" Nat asked, though he knew why. "It's too much. Singing together is one thing, but dancing, physical contact, that's a line we can't cross. It's just a dance. Two professionals performing. Wool. It's not just a dance and you know it. Not in this country. Not right now." The meeting went in circles. The executives cited sponsor concerns, affiliate stations in the South threatening to drop the show, the mail they'd already received about race mixing whenever Nat had any white guests. They used business language to describe what was fundamentally about fear and prejudice. Nat listened. Then he made his position clear. If I can't dance with Julie London the same way any white host would dance with a female guest, then what am I doing here? Am I a host, or am I a performer you're allowing on television under special restrictions? Because I thought we were past that. I thought this show was about proving that talent and professionalism transcend color. Nat, be realistic. I am being realistic. Realistically, if I accept these restrictions, I'm accepting that I'm less than equal. That my show operates under different rules than everyone else's. That there are things white hosts can do that I can't. And I won't do that. I won't be that example. The silence in the room was heavy. The executives looked at each other, calculating. The show was already struggling. Losing Nat, losing the whole production, would be a massive failure. But allowing the dance might cause an even bigger crisis. We need to think about this, one executive finally said. Think fast, Nat replied. Because we're shooting in 3 days. The decision came down from network leadership. Allow the dance. But minimize it. Keep it brief. Don't make it prominent. If there's backlash, they could claim it was a small moment, not a statement. Nat accepted the compromise, though he knew there was no such thing as a small moment when it came to breaking racial taboos on national television. Once you cross the line, the size of the step doesn't matter. Only that you crossed it. Rehearsals were tense. The crew knew what this represented. Julie London knew. She'd signed on fully aware of the controversy it would create, and she didn't care. It's just a dance, she'd said. If people have a problem with that, the problem isn't the dance. But she was white. The backlash wouldn't target her the same way. She wasn't risking her career, her safety, her life the way Nat was. She knew that. Nat knew that. They did the dance anyway. The choreography was simple. A waltz. Now. 30 seconds, maybe 40. Nat would extend his hand. Julie would take it. They'd complete a turn, separate bow, and the segment would end. Professional. Appropriate. Anormal. Pendenta. The kind of thing that happened on variety shows every week. Except this time, a black man's hand would touch a white woman's hand. On television. In front of millions. The night of the broadcast, November 19th, 1957. The studio felt different. The usual pre-show energy was there, but underneath it ran a current of tension. The crew moved quietly. The orchestra tuned their instruments with focused intensity. Everyone knew they were about to do something that would have consequences beyond the usual ratings and reviews. Nat stood backstage, adjusting his bow tie, checking his appearance in the mirror. He looked calm, professional, but his hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, from the weight of what this moment represented. Maria, his wife, had come to the taping. She stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Nobody would blame you for choosing safety. I would blame me, Nat replied. This isn't about being brave. It's about refusing to accept that there are things I can't do simply because of my skin. I know. The threats are real, Nat. The people calling in, the letters, they mean it. Then let them mean it. I'm tired of living in fear of what angry people might do. I'm tired of making my life smaller to make them comfortable. The stage manager called 5 minutes. Nat kissed Maria, straightened his jacket, and walked onto the soundstage. The show proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. Nat sang Unforgettable. The audience loved it. Julie performed her number. Gorgeous vocals, perfect control. Then came the duet, Autumn Leaves. Their voices blended beautifully, Nat's warm baritone and Julie's sultry mezzo creating something special. And then, the moment. The orchestra shifted to a waltz. Nat turned to Julie, extended his hand. The camera held on them, tight shot, no cutting away. Julie's fingers touched his palm. They clasped hands, and they danced. For 37 seconds, nothing else existed. Just two professionals executing a simple dance. Nat guided, Julie followed. They moved in perfect synchronization. Her white gown swirled. His black tuxedo created a sharp contrast. The lighting was perfect. The camera work was elegant. It was, objectively, beautiful television. It was also, in 1957 America, an act of defiance that would have immediate and lasting consequences. The cameras cut to the next segment. The show continued. Ended normally. The studio audience applauded. Nat thanked everyone, signed off, the red light went dark. And then the phones started ringing. The NBC switchboard lit up within minutes. Not a few calls. Hundreds. Then thousands. The operators couldn't keep up. Lines jammed. Messages piled up. And the content was predictable and horrifying. How dare you let a Negro touch a white woman? That's disgusting. That's race mixing on television. My children were watching. How am I supposed to explain that? You've lost a viewer. I'll never watch NBC again. Some were merely angry. Others were threats. Against Nat.ec. Against the network. Against anyone involved in allowing that kind of thing on television. Southern affiliate stations called headquarters. Some wanted to know if they'd approve this. Others wanted assurance it wouldn't happen again. A few threatened to drop the show entirely. Maybe drop NBC programming altogether if this was the direction the network was heading. Sponsor representatives called. The few companies that were running ads on the show suddenly wanted distance. They'd received calls too. Customers threatening boycotts. Stores refusing to carry their products if they continued supporting that race-mixing show. By midnight, NBC had received over 10,000 phone calls. Not all negative, but the ratio was devastating. For every person calling to support the show, there were 20 calling to condemn it. The network executives convened an emergency meeting. 2 a.m. conference room, men in rumpled suits trying to calculate damage control. We need to issue a statement. Distance ourselves. Say it wasn't approved at the highest level. That throws Nat under the bus. Nat put himself under the bus when he insisted on doing it. He's our talent. We can't abandon him. Can we afford not to? The Southern market is threatening to blacklist us. Sponsors are pulling out. This could cost millions. Around and around they argued, until finally someone said what they were all thinking. We need to end the show. It's not sustainable. Not after this. Nat heard about the meeting from his manager the next morning. The show was being canceled. Not officially yet, but the decision had been made. The dance had been the final straw for sponsors who were already reluctant. No sponsors meant no show. Simple economics. They want to meet with you, his manager said. Smooth things over. Let you save face. Meaning they want me to apologize for dancing with Julie. They didn't say that explicitly. They didn't have to. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. Nat walked into NBC's executive offices to find a room full of suits trying to look sympathetic while delivering a death sentence. Nat, we've appreciated having you. You're incredibly talented. The show has been, well, it's been challenging from a business perspective. Because you couldn't find sponsors willing to support a black host. The market dynamics are complicated. The market dynamics are racist. Say it. Be honest for once. Uncomfortable shifting. Cleared throats. Finally, one executive spoke plainly. Yes. A significant portion of our audience and our advertisers are not ready for a black host. Especially not one who crosses certain boundaries. You mean dances with a white woman? Among other things. Nat leaned back in his chair. Looked at these men who held power over his career, his show, his platform. And he made a calculation of his own. Here's what I know, he said. You're going to cancel this show whether I fight it or not. The decision is made. But you're hoping I'll make it easy. That I'll say I understand. That I'll thank you for the opportunity. That I'll go quietly. No one contradicted him. And if I do that, you can say it was a mutual decision. Creative differences. Market forces. All of the usual PR language. But if I fight, if I make noise about why this is really happening, It becomes a story about NBC canceling the first black-hosted variety show because of racism. That's not a good look for you. Nat, we're not trying to threaten. I'm not threatening either. I'm simply stating facts. You have a choice. I have a choice. So let me tell you mine. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked each executive in the eye. I'm not going to make this easy. I'm going to tell every reporter who asks that this show failed because America wasn't ready to see a black man as an equal. That sponsors wouldn't touch it because of racism. That I was asked to follow different rules than white hosts. And that when I refused to accept second-class status, when I did something as simple as dance with a colleague, the backlash was so severe that you had no choice but to cancel. That will hurt your career, maybe, but it will hurt yours too. And more importantly, it will tell the truth. Because if I go quietly, if I play along with the polite fiction that this was just business, then I'm complicit in pretending racism doesn't exist. That segregation is reasonable. That the way I was treated was acceptable. And I won't do that. Not for my career. Not for anyone. The room was silent. These men had expected negotiation. Instead, they got a line in the sand. The show is canceled, one executive finally said. That's not changing. I know, Nat replied. But how it's remembered is up to all of us. He walked out, went home, and that evening gave an interview to the press that made headlines across the country. Nat King Cole show canceled due to sponsor racism. The backlash to the backlash began immediately. Civil rights leaders praised his candor. Black newspapers ran editorials about the indignity of what had happened. Some white journalists, uncomfortable with America's racism being exposed so publicly, criticized Nat for playing the race card. But the truth was out. The Nat King Cole show hadn't failed because of quality or ratings. It failed because 1957 America couldn't handle a black man being treated as an equal. And Nat refused to pretend otherwise. The dance with Julie London became symbolic. Not because it was particularly provocative, it was just a dance, but because it represented everything threatening about equality. A black man and white woman touching. In public. Guy. Normally. As if it were no big deal. Which was exactly the point. It should have been no big deal. The fact that it caused a national crisis revealed everything about the country's racial sickness. Years later, after the Civil Rights Act passed, after segregation was legally dismantled, after much had changed, Nat was asked if he regretted the dance. If he thought he'd pushed too far, too fast. No, he said simply. The only regret I have is that it was controversial at all. That America in 1957 lost its mind over two people dancing. But I'm glad I did it, because someone had to cross that line. Someone had to demonstrate that the emperor had no clothes, that these racial taboos were nonsense enforced by fear. Did you know it would cost you the show? I suspected it might. But the show was dying anyway. Sponsors were already abandoning it. The dance just accelerated the inevitable. But it also created a conversation. It made people confront their own racism. Some changed. Most didn't. But at least they couldn't pretend it didn't exist. The Nat King Cole show ended after 64 episodes. It would be years before another black host would get a similar platform. The show's failure was cited as evidence that America wasn't ready for integrated television, that the market wouldn't support it. But Nat had proven something else, that he wouldn't accept separate but equal, that he would use whatever platform he had to challenge racism, even if it cost him that platform. That dignity and principle mattered more than career security. Julie London, reflecting on the dance decades later, said, I knew what we were doing. Nat explained the risks, and I said, yes, because it was the right thing to do. It was just a dance, but it was also so much more. It was a statement that we're all just human beings. That touch isn't contaminated by race. That art and beauty transcend these stupid categories we create. The video footage of that dance still exists in television archives. If you watch it now, knowing the context, it's almost painful how innocent it is. Two professionals executing a simple waltz. Graceful, appropriate, entirely unremarkable except for the skin colors involved. That's what makes it powerful. Not because it was provocative, but because it was normal. In 1957, America couldn't handle normal between black and white. Why? The phone calls NBC received that night, the threats, the outrage, all of it revealed more about the callers than about Nat and Julie. It revealed a deep sickness in American culture, a belief that racial purity required complete separation, that touch itself was transgressive, that equality was dangerous. Nat King Cole knew all of this when he extended his hand. He knew the consequences. He did it anyway. Because someone had to. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear because the alternative is worse. And the alternative, accepting that he couldn't do what any white host could do, accepting second-class status, accepting that his humanity was somehow different and lesser, that was unacceptable. So he danced. America lost its mind. And Nat King Cole stood firm, refused to apologize, and told the truth about why his show ended. Not everyone understood. Not everyone supported him. But everyone knew. You couldn't claim ignorance anymore. You couldn't pretend American racism was subtle or polite. Nat had forced the country to look at its own ugliness, if only for a moment. That dance lasted 37 seconds. Its legacy lasted forever. Not because it changed everything overnight, but because it was one more crack in the wall of segregation. One more moment when someone refused to accept limits placed on them by other people's fear and hatred. Years later, when Natalie Cole learned about what her father had done, about the price he'd paid for that simple dance, she understood something essential about courage. It's not grand gestures or dramatic speeches. It's doing the right thing when it would be easier and safer to comply. My father could have skipped the dance, she said. Could have kept his show a little longer. Could have played it safe. But then what would he have been? A symbol of compromise? An example that racism works if you just comply with it? He chose to be something else. Someone who wouldn't bend. And that cost him. But it also inspired everyone who came after. The Nat King Cole show may have failed. But Nat King Cole didn't. He demonstrated that dignity isn't negotiable. That principles matter more than platforms. That being first means being willing to sacrifice for those who come after. And all it took was extending his hand to a colleague and dancing for 37 seconds while America watched and revealed its true self.